Hey you guys, it's your girl Internet, and today we coming at you with the video, and it's called Army Tanks Clear Peaceful NYC Protests. A lot of people have been protesting a lot about things that they need, equality in New York, better pay, and all like that, better housing, lower the price of the housing so because it's so high. And New York is just a very busy place, and like I said, I would not want to be there because it's just too much and it's too small. I don't like closed in places. But don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, turn your notifications on so you can see me. And let's get into this video.
Dozens of arrests at both the new school and at NYU. And just within the last hour, another group of demonstrators began gathering at NYU. Eyewitness News reporter Jan.
So recently, protesters took over every major college here in New York City. And although there were mass arrests and riot police, there's still pockets of protest activity. And observers say this could be the new normal here for a long time.
We begin with the breaking news. A massive show of force to crack down on college campuses in New York City. The NYPD moving in huge machinery.
The NYPD says it received a letter from the university asking police to move in after pro-Palestinian demonstrators refused to leave on their own.
About 282 people were arrested.
We are going to stay here. We are okay with the possibility of mass arrest. We are okay with the possibility of suspension.
I spend my time, I spend my money to get here, to pay for the tuition and everything, and they just cancel my class for no reason.
Cops made their way through campus in riot gear last night as they attempted to disperse protesters.
Just a short time later, officers entered the new school, where pro-Palestinian protesters have been set up for the last 12 days. Here, 43 people were arrested. Both schools say they called in the NYPD because of growing safety concerns and disruption.
We're here to peacefully protest against the genocide. As protests continue to escalate across campuses, many leaders believe they've gone too far.
So recently, a historic war memorial was vandalized by peaceful protesters. And what nobody's talking about is that although at first these movements look like an organic showing of support for Palestine, when historic statues and monuments start getting vandalized, it shows there are anti-American undertones to all this. In fact, things were so crazy, the NYPD was forced to clear protesters from occupied buildings with a military-style vehicle called the Bear. On top of that, the police say half the protesters arrested at two of the largest uprisings weren't even students at Columbia or City College, which means whatever's behind these demonstrations is much bigger than anyone is actually aware of. And it also means there's money behind these imported non-student protesters who weren't there for free. For example, a student protester already pays room and board and gets fed by their college while they protest. But if you're not a student, you've got to pay to come here, you got to pay to feed yourself, and you have to be able to exist for as long as the protest takes place, meaning you need some type of job where you can just dip out for a week. But the real reason these protests are happening is because even though the situation in Gaza is a legitimate humanitarian crisis, these protesters are upset that their schools don't think the same way about Israel that they do. And many of these protesters feel that their schools are part of the problem and part of the reason why Israel has so much support. And these demonstrations, these have really punished these colleges, and they've lost the one thing that they may need to survive in the future. Because when you've got endless protests, school administrators have no idea how to deal with. Some people are asking themselves if the $90,000 tuition at some of these places is actually worth it. After all, what's the purpose of going hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt if your graduation might be canceled and if your final exams are given under the umbrella of rioting, chanting, and drum beats, instigated by people who don't even attend the school you're paying to go to? Is that really worth it? To answer that question, we're going to uncover what happened, why it happened, and what's stopping it from happening again in the future, which, to be honest with you, doesn't look like a whole lot.
About 282 people were arrested between Columbia and City College. Well, now the big focus, they say, is to be able to distinguish who are students and who, in fact, were not supposed to be there. And the mayor and police commissioner went on to say that it's really a combined effort working with school administrations at the request to remove protesters who refuse to leave certain areas.
As you can see, New York is dealing with unprecedented levels of college protests. But the way administrators responded may have made the whole thing worse. As you'll see, colleges tried negotiating with the protesters, and they let these these things go on to a point where the protesters felt like they could stay forever, which is why the police had to roll in their crazy new tank contraption, which is completely bulletproof, detects radiation, and comes with a turret for snipers. But the question that a lot of people have is, why did these college protests suddenly start when they did? Well, it seems that the longer this conflict goes on, the further and further away peace seems to be. There probably won't be a ceasefire anytime soon, and to many of the protesters, it's starting to look like Israel seeks the total destruction of Gaza. For a while, we were hearing about peace. Oh, there's going to be peace, but that didn't happen. And to protest this, students started gathering in mid-April at Columbia to bring awareness to this problem. But that's not the only thing that the protesters were after, and although this started with demonstrations, the goal of those was to get the university to divest, or to stop investing its endowments, which are worth millions and millions of dollars, in businesses that help Israel in any manner. Now, Columbia specifically has an endowment that's worth over $1 billion. What they do with that money isn't public knowledge, so it's hard to know exactly which investments of that money the protesters had an issue with, but almost as soon as these demonstrations started, things took a turn for the worst.
The video you're watching now really gives us a clear picture as law enforcement made their way onto those school grounds. Scenes of confusion and chaos as the NYPD efforted those arrests and trying to dial down an already tense.
Within a day of the protests starting, the university asked the NYPD to come in and clear out some of the demonstrators, and that was over 2 weeks ago. But of course, this ultimately did not deter the protesters, who kept coming back, setting up new encampments, digging in their heels, so to speak. And it should have been obvious that this was an out-of-control situation to begin with, because at this point, the college moved all classes online and started.
That was just something they should have nipped it in the bud before. But I see what they was trying to do. They were just trying to let the protesters have like a place they can go to protest on how they feel. But then the protesters, they wanted to take it a bit farther. So that's what I mean. It's kind of like hard to let people do things, because if you give people an inch, they're gonna take a mile. So this is just one of those things. But I understand they want their point across and stuff, but they shouldn't they gotta, the people who don't even go to their school, I don't think they should even be in it. And if they do, they should just, if they tell them to leave, they should leave. They shouldn't try to stick around. You're not even going to this school. So why? I understand you want to help out, but leave when they say leave.
Entering dialogues to negotiate with the protesters to find out what they wanted and how they could make the protest stop. The governor came out asking for peace and civility from the protesters. But at all these local colleges, you've got a big problem, because not only do the protesters have differences with other students, the professors at many of these colleges have differences with each other on this exact same issue. And over 100 professors at Columbia wrote an open letter that was published expressing support for this protest movement. And what student anywhere isn't happy when their professor supports them? This probably emboldened the protesters to an extent. On top of that, the professors had an issue with how the NYPD handled the recent disbursements on campus. And with stuff like this happening, it's not hard to imagine why this spiraled completely out of control, not just at Columbia, but at all these local schools. Now, for about a week, the negotiations between protesters and campus authorities went on, but at the end of the day, no agreements could be reached. The protesters wanted to stay, and the administration wanted them to leave, so they called the police back in, and that's when things got really crazy.
A massive show of force to crack down on college campuses in New York City. The NYPD moving in huge machinery, cutting locks, and making hundreds of arrests. The NYPD
So the reason things are so intense is because you had protesters occupying a building on campus. That was their headquarters. They'd taken it over, denying access to it from anybody else, and police had to physically remove them from that location. And while this is happening, students in dorms at other colleges and universities are getting wind of it. And just like that, this turned into a citywide movement enveloping all of these local area colleges. You had protesters moving between colleges, going to different protests at various locations. But what exactly were these protesters hoping to accomplish by destroying the places they needed to attend? As you can tell from the police over here and from the police barricades that surround the entire thing, what's supposed to be a higher education facility is now a zone of occupation. Because inside this building right now is the first faculty-led encampment possibly in U.S. college history. You've got about 24 faculty members residing in these tents in the lobby of this building while they're supposed to be giving final exams. And the noise from these downtown protests was absolutely insane.
I'm sure you can hear the crowd behind me. There are hundreds of protesters. Take a look. I mean, obviously they are upset about the university's decision to call in the NYPD and clear out the encampment.
What you just saw here, that's the reason why we have 2 rows of police barricades and police all over the place. Was it crazy here at the new school?
Yeah.
It was?
Yeah.
Did they break stuff inside the school?
No. It was more so, it's been very peaceful. But,
okay, that's good.
But then, of course, people got arrested.
Yeah.
Whole 9 yards. So
was there like an encampment of some kinds?
There was two. There was one here.
Okay.
And then one over here. So
in your opinion, there's no wrong answer. Do you think the police were fair when they brought people out? Was it heavy? I mean, because I've heard reports.
I didn't see, but I heard it wasn't the prettiest of things.
Okay.
But I can talk to what I saw. And
you'd be a good politician. Political science theory. It's probably important to remember that not everybody who's protesting wants to destroy the college that they attend. And by and large, most of these folks have a peaceful intent. It's a small minority that are ruining it for everybody. But that brings us to what these protesters really want. That is the big question. Because apparently in the past, protests demanding divestment from certain causes by a college have been successful. For example, in recent memory, colleges have been asked to divest from fossil fuel companies, from private prisons, and they have historically complied with those demands. And to many, it seems that the idea of financially punishing companies that are not supported by the goals of the protesters is the right move, and that this is how to do it. And the idea here is that by financially punishing companies that are helping Israel, those same companies would then lobby the government of Israel to get them to call for peace, have a ceasefire, do something, stop the war, because losing money is bad for business, and that's how people here think they can have a big effect. But unlike divestment-related protests in the past, to date, these calls have not been heeded by any of the universities. But that's got people asking, why won't the colleges just cave to the protesters, do what they want, and have these protests be over? Well, this is likely because calls for divestment, if heeded, would send a message that the college in question may be okay with an anti-Israel stance on things. After all, Israel is a U.S. ally, and a terrible tragedy took place in Israel, which is why, to many people, this conflict exists in the first place. Plus, you have students at all of these universities who may have been personally impacted by what happened there. But even if political fallout from divestment wasn't a possibility, it still may not have the intended effect the protesters are hoping for, even if the colleges were to go and pull their money out of these various companies. And the first reason for that is that it can be tricky to even know which companies to target in a divestment strategy concerning an entire country. For example, what if the college pulls money out of a certain company, discloses it, and the protesters say that's not enough? How do you win that argument? The other issue is that if colleges pull their money out of companies that are apparently supporting the war in Israel, they lose the ability to influence those very same companies. Because after all, being a shareholder of a company gives you some right over the say and operation of that very business. Colleges could collectively put pressure on companies to change what they're doing. But the third problem is that observers estimate these colleges individually, they don't own enough stock in companies that might be considered profiting from this war in the Middle East to actually make a difference if they were to sell those investments. They would just be purchased by somebody else, negating the whole idea of selling the shares in these companies to make them stop what they're doing. But at this point, the protest movements have gotten so big and so widespread that when these college encampments are cleared out by police, arrests will be made and protesters will take to the streets.
Just a short time later, officers entered the new school where pro-Palestinian protesters have been set up for the last 12 days. Here, 43 people were arrested. Both schools say they called in the NYPD because of growing.
Now, apparently here at the new school, they're getting themselves into a little Columbia situation because they've already had several police responses to the active encampment protest situation here, and it's still happening. The administration has cited safety concerns as the reason why they called in the NYPD. On top of that, 12 days is a long time for
that is a long time for protests, and you can see like he kind of like just sneaking around trying to like get shots and stuff like that. He's a great journalist.
Protesters to take over a school other people pay to attend. But after a large encampment was broken up at New York University, that turned into a march on one of the nearby local parks, and rampant vandalism, flag burning.
So
this is the kind of stuff that's taking place out on the streets of the city once colleges ask the police to move in. Now, to an outside observer, there's no reason to do stuff like that unless your goal is awareness at all costs, even if those costs make the city around you a worse place for everybody to live. But when historical statues, artifacts, memorials start getting vandalized, that makes people stop supporting the protesters. And Mayor Adams is offering $5,000 of his own money for information leading to the capture of people who vandalize public monuments. And it's at this point, when you start to see stuff like this that says capitalism is the enemy, that you start to realize maybe America's an enemy of these protesters to an extent. And this mixed messaging brings up a big question. Do all of the protesters even know why they are at these protests or why they're happening? Do they all want to accomplish the same goal, or are some there just to protest what their own personal goal or personal grievance might be? And is it possible that this is just rebellion for the sake?
Keep your hands to yourself.
You know, NYU is turning into more of a prison than a higher education facility. And at a recent protest here, some of the folks that came were unsure what their purpose actually was.
I think the goal is just showing our support for Palestine and demanding that NYU stops. I honestly don't know all of what NYU's doing.
Is there something NYU's doing?
I really don't know. I'm pretty sure they're... Do you know what NYU's doing?
she was honest. And
yeah.
I think that whatever she thought she was doing there was probably what most people thought they were doing there. Which,
well, at least she was honest. Like, she don't even know the rest of the reason why they're protesting. It was kind of running through my mind. I'm like, why are y'all protesting? Is it something dealing with y'all college or something? But at least she was honest. She said she didn't know, so.
means aside from the leaders of the protest and the agitators that were brought in, many of the folks were just bystanders. At the end of the day, this is a moment in history. It is an act of extreme significance happening at the school you go to. Of course people are going to go by and want to see what's happening. Of course, it doesn't exactly help that the protester in that video admitted that they had just come from another protest, so they were checking them all out like a tour. But when you look at all the heightened security and the lockdowns that are happening at all of these universities, you can tell that the protesters did accomplish something. If the protesters' goal was awareness, they got it. And if it was to punish these schools financially, they also got it, just not in the manner that they were expecting.
With breaking news out of Columbia, where the university has just announced it's canceling its main graduation ceremony. This, of course, amid the ongoing protests. Now, a statement posted online said, based on input and feedback from student leaders, the university has decided to focus attention on class days and...
So if you wanted to punish your college for something, you would take away from them the one thing that they offer every student, and that is a secure learning environment that comes with a graduation at the end. Graduation's part of college. People work for years for that moment to get their diploma and have their picture taken and celebrate with their family. Now that these campuses have been turned into military-style occupation zones with checkpoints and police barricades and guards everywhere, they no longer look like safe places to learn and start building your future. And now you've got graduations being canceled and moved around all because of unexpected protests that appeared at the last minute, attended by people who don't go to your school. But if you think about it, many of the schools had no choice. How would they know that there would be no mass demonstration or attack on a graduation ceremony if one happened? And if they're having trouble controlling the protests that happen on campus and the graduation's going to happen on campus, you know something's going to happen. But there are many folks who say that canceling a graduation at a school like Columbia definitely sends the wrong message. And of course, all this extra security, these police barricades, they send the message that this place is out of control. And this is...
Yeah, and then plus, them, like they said, these kids work hard for that right there. They want to have their moment. And they deserve their moment. So this protest, I feel like if it is a peaceful protest and they see that graduation is coming up, they should not protest that day. Not protest that day if it's peaceful, because they're still at that class who worked hard all those years shine on a protest that can at least wait till tomorrow. That's my point on that.
In spite of both the governor and the mayor coming out in support of the fact that colleges should normally operate and have their graduations. Because they know, as well as everybody else, that once you cancel something major like that, the protesters have won. And now they control the school. And that brings up the real issue here that nobody's talking about. If these colleges don't control their own campuses, if instead those campuses are controlled and run by the protesters who just show up whenever they want and do whatever they want, are people really going to take college serious as an investment in their own future if that's not something they support? Or if, like one of the many normal students on these campuses, they just wanted to go to class and graduate? Is that too much to ask? Or is attending one of these major universities now something that people should only do if they have it in their toolbox to become a protester and to join in with something like this? Will future college life be something akin to living in a police state all the time? And is it even going to be a good idea to go to one of these colleges if you don't support and fall in line with the beliefs of people who may start protesting randomly? There are professors right now at all of these universities who sympathize with the protesters and their intended goals and support them. And if you're a student thinking of attending one of these schools, how could you not look at the actions of the administration and decide if that's the right place for you to go? Because everyone knows we haven't seen the last of these campus protests. There are still ongoing protests in New York City, and how a college or university decides to control its campus is going to be something people have to start thinking about years before they even show up. By the way, props to NYU for still having a graduation. But how do we know if future college life and activity won't be disrupted by protest-related activity in the years to come? After all, the goals of the protesters have not been met. Have we seen the last of campus protests in New York, or are they just an extension of the protests and activity that has already been taking over this city since last year? Let me know what you think. Thank you.
And see that when people go looking for colleges and stuff like that, they look for safety too. If that stuff like that all of a sudden just pop out, people gonna start worrying about their kids. They're gonna be worried about like a number of things, like when the police gonna get called in, what are they protesting for? Is it even worth protesting about? And I mean, people already don't want to go to college because it's already super expensive, and then like they can really find a job or get a trade and make just about the same amount of money. So that's just something to think about. I just hate that. Well, I'm glad that they did get to have their graduation, because like I said, they're just taking the spotlight off of them, and the police shouldn't have been called if it's supposed to been peaceful. So when someone tell you to leave or something like that, you just bag up or whatever like that, protest a little bit, and then you just get out of there if it's supposed to be peaceful. Long as they're not fighting and stuff like that, which they weren't, then I feel like that's a part of peaceful protest. But when someone tell you to get back and stuff like that, like just move on or whatever, and then just come back. You can, it's ways to get your points across, and I'm pretty sure that it took every step it is to take to get to that point to protest. But I feel like the police shouldn't have had to been called. The people that do not go to that school, they need to bag off significantly. They need to bag off, because they're making the students that does go there, they're making it look bad. So you guys, you tell me what y'all thought about the video, and I will catch y'all in the next one. Bye, you guys.